Imagine you're sitting in a small gray room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a table, two chairs, and across from you a police officer who seems friendly, calm. He says, "Look, you're not in trouble. We just want to clear things up. Can we talk?" And here's what almost everyone does next. They start talking, they explain, they justify, they try to be helpful. That is exactly what the police are counting on. Here's a question most people never think to ask until it's too late. Why would an officer who is building a case against you want you to say almost anything at all? And what is it about your own words that can turn a routine stop into an airtight conviction? In this video, you're going to discover the single most dangerous thing you can say to law enforcement. You'll learn why silence isn't just golden. It's legally bulletproof. And by the end, you'll understand a truth that most criminal defense attorneys wish every citizen knew before they ever opened their mouth. But first, let me tell you about a man who said 7 words that destroyed his own defense before he even got to court, and why the police officer who heard them barely had to hide his smile. You've seen it in movies 100 times. The cop slams the handcuffs on and rattles off, "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." And the suspect just stares back, silent, defiant. Here's the reality that Hollywood doesn't show you. Most real people, when faced with that moment, do the exact opposite. They talk, they explain, they plead, they try to convince the officer that there's been a mistake. And every single word they utter is like handing the prosecution a loaded weapon. Police officers are trained in something called the read technique. It's a 9-step interrogation method designed to get you to talk and eventually to confess. But here's what almost nobody talks about. They don't need you to confess to win. They just need you to talk. Just a few inconsistent statements, a single contradiction, one small admission that can be twisted, recontextualized, or blown up later in front of a jury. See, the moment you speak, you're not defending yourself. You're giving them evidence. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been pulled over for something small? A broken taillight, rolling through a stop sign, and the officer asks, "Do you know why I stopped you?" Most people immediately start guessing. Was I speeding? Did I swerve? Oh, was that light yellow? Stop right there. That question is a trap disguised as small talk, because whatever you say can be used to establish reasonable suspicion, probable cause, or even consciousness of guilt. If you say, "I might have been going a little fast," congratulations, you just admitted to speeding. The officer didn't even need the radar gun, but it gets stranger. There's a psychological principle at play here called the reciprocity bias. Humans are wired to want to be helpful, cooperative, and liked, especially by authority figures. So when a police officer acts polite and says, "Just help me understand your side," your brain screams, "Be reasonable, explain, clear this up." That instinct is exactly what gets people convicted. Think about this. In the United States alone, there are over 50,000 wrongful convictions that studies suggest involve false confessions or incriminating statements made by innocent people. But those are just the ones we know about. The real number is almost certainly higher. People who talked themselves into a cell because they thought the truth would set them free. It doesn't. Not in that room. Not at that moment. Now here's where the law gets really interesting, and where most people misunderstand their rights completely. You've heard the phrase plead the fifth, right? But here's what they don't teach you in civics class. Your right to remain silent isn't automatic. You have to invoke it, clearly, unambiguously, and if you say one word after that invocation, you may have just waived it. Let me give you a real example. A man is arrested on suspicion of assault. The officer reads him his Miranda rights. The man says, "I want a lawyer." Then the officer says, "Okay, but just so we can clear this up, can you tell me what happened that night?" And the man, thinking he's safe because he already asked for a lawyer, says, "I was there, but I didn't hit anyone." What just happened? In many jurisdictions, that statement is now admissible in court, because by speaking voluntarily after invoking his rights, courts can argue he waived them. He reopened the door, and the prosecutor walked right through. This changes everything about how you should think about any interaction with police, whether you're a witness, a suspect, or just someone who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Here's the rule that could save your life, your freedom, or your reputation. Say these exact words. "I am invoking my right to remain silent, and I want to speak to an attorney." Then stop. Not another word. Not, "But I didn't do anything wrong." Not, "I'll answer some questions." Nothing. Silence isn't rude. It's legal self-defense. Now, let's talk about the ticking clock that almost no one understands. From the moment you are in custody, meaning you're not free to leave, the police have a limited amount of time before they must charge you or release you. That window varies by jurisdiction, but in many places, it's 48 to 72 hours. Here's what the police know that you don't. They know that if they keep you talking for just a few hours, you'll get tired, frustrated, hungry, anxious to go home. and that's when you make mistakes. There's a famous study from the University of Michigan that found the average person can withstand about 45 minutes of sustained interrogation before their verbal defenses start to break down. After 2 hours, most people will say almost anything to end the experience. After 4 hours, memory becomes malleable, confusion sets in, and false statements, including false confessions, skyrocket. But here's the part that should send a chill down your spine. Police are legally allowed to lie to you during an interrogation. They can tell you your friend already confessed. They can tell you they have your fingerprints on the weapon. They can tell you the security camera caught everything. None of it has to be true. They just have to make you believe it. So imagine this. You're innocent. You've been in that small room for 6 hours. An officer leans in and says, "Look, we know you did it. But if you just tell us what happened, we'll tell the judge you cooperated. You'll be home tonight." And because you're exhausted, scared, and desperate, you say, "Okay, fine, I was there, but it was an accident." Those words, "but I was there," just became the cornerstone of a prosecution case, even if you never touched anyone, even if you were just walking by, and then something unexpected happens in the minds of most viewers right here. They think, "But I would never confess to something I didn't do." That's what everyone thinks, until it happens to them. The Innocence Project has documented hundreds of cases where innocent people confessed to murders, assaults, and robberies they simply did not commit. One of the most famous examples is the Central Park Five, teenagers who, after hours of interrogation, gave detailed false confessions that sent them to prison for years, for a crime they had nothing to do with. Why? Because the human brain, under extreme stress, sleep deprivation, and psychological pressure, can actually begin to doubt its own memory. You start to wonder, maybe I was there, maybe I did see something, maybe I blacked out. This is not a weakness, it is basic human neurobiology, and the police are trained to exploit it. So what do? How do you protect yourself without being rude or escalating the situation? Let me give you the 4 most powerful words you can ever say to law enforcement, and you need to hear this because almost nobody knows how powerful they really are. I don't answer questions. That's it. Not aggressive, not confrontational, just a statement of fact. Officer, I don't answer questions. Am I free to leave? If you're not under arrest, in most cases, they have to let you go. If you are under arrest, you say, "I am invoking my right to remain silent and I want a lawyer." Then nothing else. But here's the twist that most lawyers won't tell you on TV. Even after you say those words, the police may keep talking to you. They may try to provoke you. They may ask seemingly harmless questions like, "Do you know what time it is?" or "Are you feeling okay?" These are not friendly gestures. These are attempts to reestablish rapport and get you talking again. Because once you answer any question, even, "Do you want some water?" they can argue in court that you voluntarily resumed the conversation, and the judge might agree. Let's test your knowledge right now. True or false? If you're innocent, you have nothing to hide. So you should just answer their questions and clear it up. False. Absolutely, completely, dangerously false. Here's why. Innocent people are actually more at risk than guilty people in some ways. A guilty person knows they need to be careful. An innocent person often walks in thinking, "The truth will set me free." But the truth is messy. Memories are flawed. And police are not looking for the truth. They are looking for evidence. There's a massive difference. Evidence is anything that can be used to support a charge. Your nervous laughter? That's evidence of deception according to some training manuals. Your shaky voice? Guilt. Your changing story because you remembered something new? Consciousness of guilt. See how this works? The very things that prove your innocence, confusion, fear, imperfect recall, become weapons against you. Now let me ask you something personal. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you had to explain yourself to authority? Maybe a boss, a teacher, or a security guard? How did that feel? Did they believe you? Or did they twist your words? Leave a comment and let me know, because this psychological dynamic is everywhere. But when police are involved, the stakes are infinitely higher. Here's where most online advice gets it wrong. Some people will tell you, just be polite and answer basic identifying questions. Give your name and address, that's all. And that's true in some traffic stop contexts. Most states have stop and identify statutes. But here's the nuance. Those statutes require you to identify yourself. They do not require you to explain where you're going, what you're doing, or why you look nervous. So when the officer says, where are you headed tonight? You are not obligated to answer. You can say, "Officer, I'm not answering that question. Am I detained or am I free to go?" That is not obstruction. That is your constitutional right. And watch what happens next. In many cases, the officer will be surprised. They're used to people oversharing. They're not used to calm, clear boundary setting. And that's exactly why it works. But let's take this one level deeper. Because the most dangerous situation isn't a traffic stop. It's when you're a witness. Imagine you see something strange in your neighborhood, a car speeding away, a loud argument. You call the police to be a good citizen. They arrive and say, "Can you describe what you saw?" And you want to help. Of course you do. But here's the trap. The more you talk, the more you lock yourself into a story. And if that story changes even slightly, because human memory is fluid, you could be accused of lying. Or worse, you could become a suspect yourself. There are documented cases where witnesses became targets simply because their initial description didn't match later evidence. Not because they lied, because memory faded, details shifted, and prosecutors painted that as dishonesty. So what do you do if you want to be a good citizen but also protect yourself? You say this: "I'll provide a written statement after I've spoken with an attorney. I want to be accurate, not rushed." That's reasonable. That's smart. And it protects everyone involved. Now here's the open loop I promised you earlier. Remember that man who said 7 words that destroyed his own defense? Let me close that loop now. His name was not famous, just an ordinary guy in Ohio who got pulled over for a minor traffic violation. The officer smelled something, maybe alcohol, maybe not, and asked him to step out. The man was nervous. He hadn't been drinking. He knew he was innocent. So when the officer said, "Have you had anything to drink tonight?" the man said, "No, but I did have a beer earlier this afternoon." That's 7 words. "No, but I did have a beer earlier this afternoon." The officer administered a breathalyzer. He blew 0.00, completely sober, but because he admitted to drinking earlier, the officer claimed probable cause for a field sobriety test anyway. The test was subjective. The man failed one part, the walking turn. He was arrested for OVI. The case went to court, and the prosecutor played that recording. "No, but I did have a beer earlier this afternoon." The jury heard beer and afternoon and admission. He was convicted, not because he was drunk. Because he talked. His own words, spoken in an attempt to be honest, became the only evidence the state needed. That is the terrifying power of the human voice in an interrogation. And that is why police want you to say anything at all. Anything. So let me give you the bottom line, the one takeaway that could change everything if you ever find yourself in that gray room under those buzzing lights. You cannot talk your way out of being arrested. You can only talk your way into being convicted. Once the police have decided to question you, the outcome is no longer in your hands. Your guilt or innocence is irrelevant to the immediate moment. What matters is this: every word you say is a brick in the case against you. The only winning move is to not play their game. Invoke your rights. Ask for a lawyer. And then, this is the hardest part for most people, sit in the silence. Because silence is not weakness. Silence is waiting for the one person who is actually on your side, your attorney. And until that person arrives, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Say nothing. Explain nothing. Apologize for nothing. Let the silence protect you the way no sentence ever could. If you found this video helpful, and I mean genuinely helpful, not just entertaining, do me a favor. Share it with someone you care about, because the person who needs to hear this isn't you. It's your friend, your brother, your co-worker who thinks they'd never get into trouble. They're wrong. Trouble finds everyone eventually. But knowledge? That's the difference between going home and going to court. And before you go, answer this in the comments. Honestly, if a police officer asked you right now, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" what would you actually say? Be real. Most people freeze, but now you know better. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, remember, the most expensive words you'll ever speak are the ones you didn't need to say.